Now, we had gone over and covered kind of the complexity of the child as in the situation of childhood. Then we have to realize that these complexities have only grown, through their adulthood. So we've got, say, this woman, we're going to use woman for example, that has been violated possibly up through their teens, right? Fairly consistently, that's usually how that goes, and they're trying to enter relationship, so we can understand, right, the platform that they're stepping into that conversation. And often these children are super grown up in some aspects and very, very childlike in other aspects, right? So often, right, as they enter relationship, touch is weird, because we have to also remember that on top of this, or underneath the sexual violation, they were already highly sensitive and probably empathic and pretty psychic. So how they're reading those situations is going to be, more in depth than a person that was just stepping in. Right? Does that make sense? So we've got this person that is, often stepping into, because they're hunting for love. They are hunting for love in often the wrong places, right? And their body has been up to this point a gateway for, quote, love, right? And often we find this searching leaves them in a series of dysfunctional relationships, right? And, another aspect is this level of immaturity. And what are they basing relationship on other than TV shows, media, ideals, fairy tales, right? And often they're waiting for someone to come save them, right? Somebody to come rescue them. And unfortunately, that rarely happens, Instead, we're carrying forward everything that we wanted to leave behind, because in our default programming, right, Ayurveda says that's up to 7, science says that's right in place by 5. So we have to recognize when a person's back is against the wall, they're not thinking, they're reacting, and that reaction comes from that default programming that is ancient sometimes, right? And often those abusive behaviors show up in display, right? And we're like often on the back end of that, like, I can't believe I did that, right? I can't believe I behaved like that. I can't believe that came out of me, and we run in and say we're sorry. That's that continuation of abuse. So until we really get in there and dismantle those, quote, reactions and those autoplay responses, right? That is a strong arm space, right? Now, I can remember, with my first child, like watching instincts rise out of me and being horrified by them, right? And if a person is not conscious, that stream of energy and emotion is going to drive through their conscious thought. Now, when we're diving in with these folks, right, recognizing that most adults are more concerned with today than they were 20, 30 years ago. Absolutely. And we have to realize that fixing today isn't going to change anything. So when we can start recognizing the patterns that are following these folks through life, right, we can hop into that cycle and truly dismantle it. And within that, integrate the fragments that are a part of that cycle. Now, when we're stepping in with an adult, like, we have to look at what is displaying in their life today to start recognizing those patterns, right? So, you know, are they throwing temper tantrums? Are they hitting, right? I've got one young woman that gets really violent when she gets angry. And, you know, so when we can start recognizing how they're showing up today and understanding and tracing that back through that pattern, yeah, we can come to that initial moment and do surgery. Yeah. Now, these folks, right, their quotient, like Gandhi says, our happiness quotient is in place by the age of 7 as well. That means, you know, the definition of happy for us, and we have to understand for these folks that quotient is pretty low, and what is acceptable from other people is pretty high, right? And, you know, bringing that into balance and recognition is a big portion of our job, right? Is defining for them what is acceptable or with them, what is acceptable within their relationships, right? What is serving them, you know, and making sure that the story is coherent. I've got a young woman right now that left her husband, and her story, every time she tells it, is that he left her. And, you know, I have to remind her every session, honey, you left him. He is reacting to your actions, right? Taking ownership of those choices becomes a big part of the game, right? Because they're always running forward. So their definition of what's happening to them is through a lens of sideswipe. Yeah. You know, so when we're going into these moments, it is super important before we pull out the scalpel and jump to be very clear what we're planning on affecting when we get in there, right? So is their definition of love that it hurts? Or love and relationship is really hard work and you have to compromise and sacrifice, yeah? Right? Is it acceptable to us because of our previous experience that kids need their daddies no matter what daddy is, or how he's behaving, or how he's showing? Yeah. This is a big one. Women hang on to this, right? Up until the very end. Kids need their daddies, and it's not true. They need their moms to be an authority of their safety. And if daddy can't show up, or mom, well, it's, you know, mom, I'll tell you what, like, you know, what I've witnessed through the years is backed against the wall. Like if a mom gives her child up for adoption, they're usually hunting for mom. And that connection is an ownership and accountability that I think we have dodged for centuries, right? People come out of our bodies. And if daddy can't behave himself and act like an adult human being and take care of his PTSD or whatever, then no, kids don't need that, right? They don't need that, right? It's better to be in a space of without than to be constantly managed and defined how love is, right? And the love of one should not be damaging everyone else, right? And that's another piece I often hear from women is, you know, as she knows that her children are being harmed, the words, but I love him. And what I can say is that's a craving, right? That's a craving, right? They're fulfilling their programming for each other. Their default programming fits, right? So her loving him should not be to the detriment of her children ever, right? That's not love. And as we're going into these moments, redefining love is a huge piece, right? You know, being able to say, honey, right? If you're sacrificing your personal integrity for this person, that's entanglement. That's not love, right? Love should not cost you anything, right?
Excuse me, Cherie.
Yes.
When you use the word entanglement, are you talking about codependence too?
Yes. You know, what ends up happening is through this quantum entanglement that we're untangling with the jumping, right? The entanglement of the mental processes, the energetic processes, all of the 5 major systems have to come into alignment, right? So it's entanglement throughout all of the layers, right? But as we're in those loops, we can redefine these moments. We can redefine what words mean. Yeah. And we can redefine what is acceptable and how we can show up differently in those moments.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, by going back in a quantum jump, right?
Yes. Right? That's where it's important for us to have our detective hats on every time we speak to them. We are tracking, like, what is their default programming? What do we need to shift and change within those loops? And often relationship and love, right, are pretty consistent within every loop, right? Now, often, you know, as adults, they're feeling like they can't trust anyone, which is true. And which is true because they can't trust self, right? They're gathering how they should show up and how they should think and what is, quote, normal, right? Within every circumstance, which is very confusing, right? I spoke to a young woman yesterday and I was like, honey, like, please, like, let's keep these conversations of your relationship and your suffering right here, right? We don't need to gather everyone's worry and put it in our bucket as we're trying to choose, right? Now, because of this fragmentation and the lack of consistent choice making, right? Their lack of self-trust, right, is eroded completely. Now, also on top of that fragmentation and that outward gathering, we have to understand that, like, you know, people from the outside within their home were defining, right? So you're not enough, you can't do anything right, you're just a screw up, you're always doing everything wrong. Or if you're not completely perfect, what are you doing? Why would you do that? You know, I can remember for myself, I was a really good student, and I was, I can't remember, there was a couple things that I struggle with a little bit. And if I came home with a B plus, I would get in trouble, right? While my brother was not getting in trouble for Fs, right? So those weird expectations, right, are within these homes where one sibling, like, they treated him like he was stupid and they treated me like I was a genius, and neither were true. Yeah. So as we're moving them out of this crisis space, it's super important for them to recognize that they have fought that fight and she won. She's still here. Nobody took her out, right? She has made it to today because of this child, right? Because of the brilliance of this child, because of possibly how many things the clairvoyance and clairaudio and spatial clairvoyance averted, right? We have to recognize that too. That is also an odd, crazy making space for someone who is psychic. If they're getting premonitions that bad things are happening, then they're going to make different choices and possibly the bad thing doesn't happen. Right? Are they recognizing that they thwarted the bad thing? All they're thinking of is, you know, that didn't happen. That was crazy. Why did I even think that? Right? And that distrust, you see, is eroding on every level. Right? And, you know, often and within these families, the family members are completely denying reality. Right? There's so much duality within these homes. Like, my family would rush out to rescue children every day. Like I said, my grandma had 52 foster kids. So my entire family would rush out to rescue kids while this was happening within our homes. Right? And all of my cousins were molested, all the girls. So when you think about that duality, and that they're going to run off and rescue other kids, and absolutely my family would never say it was never acceptable to have sex with children while there were pedophiles at the table. You see where I'm saying? So all the way through adulthood, it's still going on. And that's the piece that gets lost in therapy so often. I'm going to shut this away. Is that it's not about 40 years ago anymore. It's about what everyone else is doing. Yeah. So as we're maneuvering this with people, we have to recognize that all the people that have kept this hush hush over the years and are living in this glass house do not want you to be throwing rocks at it. Right? You know, and the silencing that started and the grooming that started in their childhood is still going on, right? Up until the moment that my grandmother died, my mother silenced me. Now, my mother, right, not my father, right, silenced me, saying that it would kill her, right? So we have to, because my grandma would have been horrified by everyone else. Yeah. And I think that is for an adult coming out of this consistent complex trauma is the hardest for the outside world to recognize, right? That it's not stopped. It's not like suddenly in adulthood, everybody decides that your truth is real, right? It's a very difficult place. And often we feel like we have to move into confrontation, or we have to move into battle with these people. And that's not often profitable either, right? I mean, for somebody to admit that they're a pedophile, that's a big deal, right? It rarely happens. And when we hinge our wellness on another person's words, right? We're going to stay in the pond and the quicksand for a real long time coming out of childhood sexual trauma, right? So we have to firstly be so proud, right? You know, when I move into a jump, that's often the very, very first thing I start with, right? Let's pick this child up. Let's get her out of the house and let's tell her how proud we are of her. Let's tell her how proud we are over how she handled that, right? Let's tell her that we are the grown-ups we are today because she did that, right? She's not broken. She didn't do anything wrong, right? That grown-up made really bad choices and she got through that, right? We're sorry she didn't get a Medal of Honor, but let's give her one today. Yeah, because there's no difference coming through that close than being in a concentration camp. And I don't care who gets mad at me over saying that, right? Because it is true, right? When you're in a concentration camp, your guardians and your persecutors are not the people that society says are supposed to love you. They are not supposed to be taking care of you. Their position in your life is persecution, not love. We have to recognize that. That is a fracture that goes to the quick, right? And some of these people, that starts in gestation. Yeah, that starts as soon as they take their first breath. They're realizing that, you know, what the hell? Like this person is, you know, hollering and screaming and blah, 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 right? You know, and fear enters, right, from gestation, or fear starts entering choice making, right, in infancy, right? I'm going to try to hold in my cries because I get hit every time I try to declare want, right? Or, oh my gosh, if this person is walking in the room, I have to be alert. I have to be, right, compliant. I have to try to figure out what he wants before he has to say it, because if he has to say it, I'm going to get hit, right? This is the complexity that these children are living every moment, while, right, their friends are off, you know, coloring and building with their blocks. Right? So the first step in having relationship with others is, you know, creating that relationship with self. So when we're jumping, that is the top priority, right? Sometimes I'll jump people and they won't touch each other. They won't look at each other, right? Maybe the child won't let the adult touch them or won't speak to them, right? So creating trust between the adult and the child, right, starts bringing this duality together. Now that happens, right, with the adult story and the child story merging into one, right? Most of the time, these adults are very heady and they've probably been thinking about it for a real long time, and they've made a lot of excuses for everybody's behavior and their own, trying to stay in relationship with people that are abusing them. Yeah, that is the big piece for these folks. To choose that your family, your entire family, right? It's like amputating your arm. It doesn't mean the pain goes away. Yeah. It doesn't mean that you don't miss them or feel excluded, right? You know, because often the survivor is pushed out and the family is going on. So that those adult stories and the child stories have to merge.